Hello and welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, the only podcast that's perfectly balanced as all things should be. My name is Isaac Edlin. I am your host tonight, and I have one very special Infinity Bro with me. It's Zane Ellis.
Happy to be here, the one and only.
That's right.
Zane and Isaac mess around.
Gentlemen, it's another Zane and Isaac mess around. You're going to get more and more of these as we go on because I feel like with all the Star Wars content we have this year, Zane and I are your go-to mess around podcast. For Star Wars content. So.
That's the way it's been for a while here with the Infinity Bros. It's always me and you. It's
me
like,
and you. We're here for it. We sprinkle Jared in a little bit. Yep. Robbie, when we want a uneducated opinion on Star Wars, he comes on and spews his nonsense. But it's all good fun, and Zane and I just love to talk Star Wars. So here we are.
Yeah.
Speaking of Star Wars, happy Star Wars Day to all you people out there celebrating. It is currently May 7th, but May the 4th obviously was over the weekend. A lot of cool things happened. Tales of the Empire dropped on May the 4th, so we're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to be talking about the third season of The Bad Batch, which ended last week, and Zane and I have been very excited about that show as big Star Wars nerds. And then we're going to be revealing our top 6 Star Wars things. A very general list,
right.
But we're going to make it happen. It's going to be weird. It's going to be wacky, including all media like TV, movies, video games. I mean, holiday specials. Maybe Zane has that on. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? So yeah, stick around. We'll have a lot of fun content to go over, but just wanted to have kind of a Star Wars centric episode to celebrate. I heard on another podcast that the very first Star Wars movie, I think it was 77. So we're at like 47 years of Star Wars content. Like that 50-year one is going to be massive.
Well, that's going to be such a huge anniversary. That's going to be all out.
Wild. It's going to be awesome. We should do something crazy. We should go to Star Wars Celebration in Japan or wherever it is that year. That'd
be nuts.
That'd be wild. Then we could go to some history museums for Zane and see
that'd be pretty cool.
Samurai swords.
Some swords, yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I'm all in on that.
You can check out our last episode of the Infinity Bros podcast where Zane taught me all about the history of Japan while we reviewed Shogun. It was a good time. But yeah, that's on episode 196 of the Infinity Bros podcast. For you new listeners, thank you so much for checking out the Infinity Bros. We're a group of 6 guys who just love Star Wars. We love Marvel. We love pop culture. We love movies. We love TV, video games, and we love talking about it. So we'd love to have you guys in on the discussion. You can check out theinfinitybros.com for all of your Infinity Bros needs. You can join our Discord to get in on the Infinity Bros universe and chat with us about all of those crazy things, including and Magic the Gathering too. I should mention that because we're basically half Magic the Gathering content creators now because Robbie just basically quit his job and went all in on Magic the Gathering. So here we are, and honestly he's thriving with it. Dude is killing it on the Magic the Gathering front. So if you're into Magic, or if you're for me and Zane, we're the guys who have always been oh yeah, I think that would be kind of cool. We're on the outskirts. Robbie was a perfect person to draw us in and be all right, let's actually get into this. So
right.
I think he'll be the same for you if you give him a chance. Check him out on our TikTok or selling cards on Drip. So, and we'll have all those links in our show notes. All right, Zane, you ready to dive into some Star Wars?
Always. That's what I'm here for.
Let's go. For those of you who may be new to the Infinity Bros, we have a special rating system on the Infinity Bros podcast.
Here on the Infinity Bros podcast, everything is ranked from a 0 to 6 point scale. 0 meaning horrible, and 6 meaning absolutely excellent. If all of the Infinity Bros rank something a 6, it gets an Infinity Snap.
So, for a few of these things, Tales of the Empire and Bad Batch specifically, we'll be rating them, and then we'll see if they get an Infinity Snap, which is the highest honor a TV show, movie, video game can achieve on the Infinity Bros podcast. All 6s all around. which kind of gets a little creepy, I guess. I never thought of it that way, but there's a lot of sixes involved.
Yeah. I mean, just a couple. Like,
as long as we never have 3 of us on the podcast and that it happens.
Yeah, we're fine.
Then we're fine. We're going to be talking about Tales of the Empire first. Like I said, that dropped on May the 4th on Disney Plus. Kind of a sequel series to Tales of the Jedi, which came out last year, which had a bunch of little short stories about Count Dooku and his Jedi life, and then Ahsoka kind of when she left the Order, and a few stories about that. And this kind of followed a similar path, following 2 characters specifically, Morgan Elsbeth, who we saw a lot of in the Ahsoka series last year, and Barriss Offee, which is kind of a throwback to Clone Wars. So if you're a big Clone Wars fan, you're probably going to enjoy this series if you haven't already consumed it. So first of all, we're going to start off with some non-spoiler reviews. What did you think, Zane, of Tales of the Empire?
I really enjoyed watching Tales of the Empire. Like, I like that they kind of broke it down. So it's like 6 episodes, and they kind of split it. So you got like 3 for Morgan Elsbeth, and you got 3 for Barriss Offee. I liked Tales of the Empire more than I liked Tales of the Jedi. It just felt like it was a little more, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I thought it was more, I don't know if I want to say comprehensive. Like, I feel like giving each of those characters the full 3 episodes did more. And plus it added, because it felt like what we had from Tales of the Jedi, it was more, I don't know, filler, I guess. Like, it was cool stuff, but it was not necessarily stuff you needed to know. Not that, the stuff from Tales of the Empire is need to know stuff, but it definitely, everything with Morgan Elsbeth was kind of like that prequel stuff. Like, it kind of set up and showed her rise a bit through the Empire, how she got to where she was. And then the big question then on the last 3 with Barriss Offee, like, that was the big question at the end of Clone Wars. What happened to her? Yeah, and then you got 3 episodes that kind of finished that. So to me, it felt like Tales of the Empire had a little more weight to it, just because it was based on more existing stuff. Whereas with Tales of the Jedi, I kind of had, it added bits and pieces to characters that were already rather well fleshed out. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I like this better because it gave more to characters that didn't necessarily have as much of that.
This is a historic moment on the Infinity Bros podcast, Zane. I think I'm going to disagree with you.
That's fine.
It's about
time. It's about
time, right? Like, Zane and I are historically pretty much aligned on literally everything. So when we do disagree, it's like rare. It does not happen very often. So my non-spoiler review, I still enjoyed this series very much. I love the idea of it. I think more than I like this actual season or series of Tales of the Empire. I love the idea of short stories filling in the pieces. And that's why I think Tales of the Jedi worked for me a lot, because we got these really short stories that just gave us a little bit of information each time. And we didn't get a 3-episode arc necessarily of Count Dooku or Ahsoka. It was more just individual short stories. And I thought that these series were very well made for that. So here comes Tales of the Empire, and they definitely changed the format a little bit, in the sense that, like you said, I mean, they've got the definite 2-part Morgan Elsbeth 3 series, and it kind of is like a prequel, like you said. And then you've got the Barriss Offee, and I still enjoyed it. I go ahead and say that I'm not a huge Morgan Elsbeth fan, so that part just didn't appeal to me that much. But I do think the Barriss Offee part was great and a story that we needed to hear, because, yeah, that was end of the Clone Wars arcs, and she just went off into the Empire, like, jail cell, and you're like, all right, well, she's gone. Like, we'll never hear from her again. And so it's cool to come back to that and be like, oh, okay, so she does have more of a story to tell. So I thought it was phenomenal. I did not like it as much as Tales of the Jedi, though. Part of that also is that I loved the Dooku episodes in Tales of the Jedi. Right. Man, Dooku's such an interesting character, and I thought the little episodic pieces of short stories that we got in Tales of the Jedi was just perfect. I absolutely loved that. But yeah, I didn't like the longer story. I feel like if you're going to do that, you might as well just like make a show about it, or like a series with that character themselves. So not quite as up on Tales of the Empire as I was Tales of the Jedi. But again, still really cool concept. Love that they're doing these. I do not want them to stop doing these. I want to see more. Even more Tales of the Empire too would be cool, because when we saw certain characters that we'll get into after a spoiler warning pop up, got very, very excited about that. So that's our non-spoiler reviews. We're gonna
I was just gonna add on to the end of that, like you said, the Barriss Offee part was way better than the Morgan Elsbeth part. Like, I will give it that. I think from the other side, though, of why I kind of like this more too, like, I kind of prefer the story drawn out a little more on more of these episodes. Like, don't get me wrong, like, Tales of the Jedi is still fantastic, even with those individual episodes, but I felt like when you do these like 3-episode arcs, like, it feels more like a complete arc. Like, this feels like an arc from Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Right. So that was more of like why I like prefer it, because it was just some of those things. Yeah, if you have a short enough story, you can do it in like one episode. But I felt like in what that Tales of Empire was trying to achieve in telling, that prequel story for Morgan Elsbeth and that sequel for like that 3-episode arc was perfect for telling that part of the story that they were trying to tell.
Yeah,
that's what I really liked. I thought it fit well with what they were trying to do.
So let's get into it a little bit deeper here. This is your official spoiler warning for Tales of the Empire.
This is...
Prepare yourself.
An Infinity Bros.
Prepare yourself.
Spoiler. Warning.
All right, Zane. So right off the bat, I think it's even the first episode. Yeah, it's the first episode of Morgan Elsbeth's arc. When we see Grievous, that was the moment that I was like, yeah! Like,
that was sweet.
I love Grievous, dude. He's like one of my favorite Star Wars villains. And the fact that we see him and he's like actually... See, I like him a lot, but he gets portrayed so poorly in a lot of different types of media. Like, he is a coward. Like, that's his character, and that's fair. Like, I'm fine if you portray him as a coward, but a lot of times in Clone Wars he gets portrayed almost as like a bumbling, like clumsy, can't do anything right type of commander. That just bums me out sometimes, because you watch those old Clone Wars animated shorts or series or whatever, and dude takes out a group of Jedis like without even flinching, like doesn't even phase him at all. Like, he is powerful.
Right.
And the fact that they kind of nerfed him in Clone Wars is a little bit of he still had a lot of cool moments in Clone Wars. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he was totally done wrong in Clone Wars, but they definitely portrayed him more as like as a guy who would just run away all the time.
Right.
Rather than, this really cool villain who was powerful in his own right. So the fact that we get him tearing up was that Dathomir? I'm assuming it was Dathomir, because it's like that's where the Night Sisters live and stuff like that.
But
I don't know. It didn't look similar to the environment of Dathomir that we've seen before in other media.
It had to have been another one of the worlds like Dathomir. Because I'm pretty sure Dathomir only had the Night Sisters, because like that was their home world, whereas the planet on Morgan Elsbeth had that other the people in the mountains.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, and that was a known thing too. All the Night Sisters like had places on all these different worlds. And I can't remember if it ever said what world Morgan Elsbeth was actually from. Yeah, it was definitely.
Off the top of my head either.
But it was also the same thing. Like, they were definitely like purging the Night Sisters. Like, that was definitely not because a threat to the Empire and everything. So like that was a big part even in Clone Wars. Like, the droids, they were still hunting Night Sisters too.
Oh yeah, right.
But yeah, that just to start that episode with awesome. Grievous, even I had kind of that same reaction. It was like, this is sweet. This is how you hooked right away.
And then like just Grievous just laughing, and as he's like tearing people up the whole time, it's just like, oh my gosh, this dude is psychotic, and I love that.
That's the part I like too. I get Vader has like the iconic breathing that everyone recognized, but like Grievous's cackle, that mechanical cackle he has,
And then the cough right after.
Yeah, and then the cough, like that is so much more intimidating. Well, not intimidating, but like that's way more of a terrifying.
Yeah.
You get the instant fear of Vader's breathing, but if you hear that cackle and cough, that's like scary. Like that's an underrated soundbite in anything Star Wars.
Absolutely. And I think too, he in Revenge of the Sith, he's actually like, they portray him very well in that movie as well, which I'm trying to remember, did Clone Wars come out like this, the animated series, did that come out before Revenge of the Sith? It had to have been right around the same time, probably.
It had to have been after.
It must have been after. Yeah, it had to have been after. But I love how they portray him in Revenge of the Sith. Like, again, he goes back to this menacing threat. And man, that iconic scene where Obi-Wan drops down, we get the hello there, and then Grievous whips out his 4 lightsabers. Just like, oh my gosh, that is so cool.
It's too cool.
It's amazing. And going back to watch that again, the CGI on Grievous holds up. It's still like so stinking good. I have this one image burned into my brain of where they like focus in on his mask and his eyes specifically, and like the rest of the background like fades away and it looks so real. I'm like, this is CGI? Like this looks so good.
Right.
And we're going back and watching the Harry Potter movies for the kids. We're going to Universal and Disney this summer. And I was like, we got to at least like get them exposed to it before we bring them there, because otherwise it will mean absolutely nothing to them. So going back and watching those movies, and the CGI in those movies is atrocious. It's not good. And you know, back in the day, like whatever, that was just like how movies were made back then. But there's a definite shift from like, I think it's like movie 3 to 4 where the CGI starts getting better. But like those first 3 movies are so bad. It's like going back and like, oh man, this is almost hard to watch, but it's like a still iconic movie. So like, you're like, okay, well, whatever.
It's crazy too. Like, I guess bit of a sidebar, but that weird time in the early 2000s, how it was either like really, really well or really, really like eh.
Right.
So like that, but then you watch like Pirates of the Caribbean, and like Pirates of the Caribbean is still to this day top notch for how it's animated.
I think
like,
it's the second one with Davy Jones.
Yeah.
He is
incredible.
Still mind-blowing CGI, like looks phenomenal. And you go back to Lord of the Rings too, which was early 2000s. That CGI still holds up.
Yep.
And, you know, there are projects out there that did things really, really well for the time, especially. But if you can go back 20 years now and the CGI still holds up, that's impressive. So yeah, it's cool to see those types of projects. But yeah, that's what I remember about that Revenge of the Sith Grievous. Like, dude looked great and cemented him as one of my favorite Star Wars villains. And then all the lore that we've gotten about him since then just has made me love him more. So I loved seeing him in this episode. I did mention though that like Morgan Elsbeth just as a character does not interest me that much. Like, she is interesting, don't get me wrong. I do like that she, you know, has that Night Sister origin, and then like in the Ahsoka show we get to see a lot more of that along with Thrawn, which Thrawn shows up. That was another big moment, I think, in her third, maybe is it the third one? Maybe I don't remember.
Yeah, it was at the end, because it was the whole the Empire wasn't recognizing what she was doing, what Thrawn did.
I love seeing Thrawn, but again, this whole Elsbeth art, especially too, another thing that kind of threw me for a loop was the fact that she is this like technical genius somehow, and I was like, that's not really your thing. Like, I don't really understand where that came from, where she like designed not the twin ion engines, but it was like the Interceptor or whatever, and that's where like Thrawn got that design or whatever, because he like recruited her. And I was like, nowhere in Ahsoka or The Mandalorian have we seen anything about her being this like technical genius that can come up with this stuff. And then all of a sudden she is in this. At that part I was just like, okay, whatever.
Well, I mean, that was also a part of a thing too. Like, it just was something that was never really explored. Like there was still a lot of mystery behind her. Like you knew the way, I mean, you knew she was in charge of like that town, so you knew there was more to her than just like, oh, she's not just like some mob boss here.
Right.
It was a decent way of kind of establishing some of that, because like there is still so much of that character that it never dove into.
If they wanted to establish that in general, I understand that these are kind of one-offs a little bit. We're probably not going to see a whole lot more of Morgan Elsbeth in like Star Wars content moving forward. It's telling her story because of that, because we're not going to get a whole lot more of her. But like, if you were going to establish her as that, why wouldn't you have, like, there was a perfect opportunity in Ahsoka when she's like making that, what do they call it? The giant like ring ship or whatever. Just put a lot more emphasis on her designing that and like being the one that came up with that, instead of her just like giving everything to Baylan Skoll and like telling him to go do stuff. I don't know. It just seemed like it came out of nowhere to me. And I was like, okay, all right, whatever.
That's fair.
Yeah, so those episodes, they're fine. They're not bad at all by any means. But yeah, when Thrawn showed up in that final episode, that was cool too. And another reason that one was cool was because these shows are animated in the Clone Wars style.
Yeah.
And we hadn't seen Thrawn in the Clone Wars animated style, and he looked way better than the Rebels Thrawn, dude. Like, I thought he looked phenomenal in that episode in the very short time that we got to see him. Rebels Thrawn too, like Rebels in general, the animation is just a lot simpler and more wonky, because I think it's kind of targeted towards kids a little bit more, so it just looks wonky, and he's a lot more like tall and thin in that show. But yeah, I thought he looked really, really good in this episode.
Right, because your whole basis of his animation so far has been from Rebels. Like that was the first of seeing that, and it was like you never saw it, but like you knew it was going to look good, and then you saw it and you're like, oh
yeah.
But then again, to flip back, like that more just goes to show of how like I wish they would have kept that animation for Rebels.
Yeah, Rebels could have been better.
Right.
Like, and I'm gonna give a little bit of a sneak peek. Rebels is on my top 6 list that we're doing at the end here. It's a very, very, very good show, but it could have been better if they had just done better animation.
I 100% agree.
So what else did you like about Morgan Elsbeth's, though? Because you definitely seem to be more into that arc than I was.
Yeah, it just, I think I kind of was saying earlier, there's just more of that establishment of like what her background was, like how she kind of rose to her position. And then the fact that it was just, even just setting up then at the end of seeing how she came to be in charge of that town that we see in, what is that, season 2 of Mandalorian, when we first see Ahsoka. And stuff like that's the town she's at, like the whole setup. They did so much to kind of set up what you saw her in from her introduction in season 2 Mandalorian. That's why, like, I wish we probably should have got more of that like before. It seems weird that we got this years later. Like it probably would have helped a ton to have this story. I know it doesn't fit with the Jedi, but like if you did more of an anthology, like have these episodes with Tales of the Jedi, because that would have explained more of what's coming up
a little bit, right? Yeah.
Whereas now it's like the storybook on Morgan Elsbeth has basically been closed unless they want to go whole Project Necromancer on her or something. I mean, she is a Night Sister, you don't know.
Right, so. Yeah. I mean, there definitely still is some story to tell. And, you know, I take that back because she is still stuck on the planet that Baylan Skoll and Ahsoka and Sabine are all on too, right? I forget the name of that planet, but I think she's still there, right?
Well, she died. Well, she got killed there on top of that tower.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Never mind. Forget everything that I just said.
So yeah, she is technically still there.
I mean, hey, she's a Night Sister, so
that's what I'm saying.
It could happen.
It could happen, and it's Star Wars. You know, no one stays dead in Star Wars.
Exactly.
How much hate does she have in her heart? It works for Maul, you know.
Yeah, she could survive just based on how much hate she has for Ahsoka. Yeah, maybe. Another minor note in that 3rd episode, I would be very interested to see where all of these are on the timeline, because we get Rook, which is, he's like a bounty hunter that works for Thrawn and Rebels. Obviously, Morgan Elsbeth is not involved in Rebels, so really it could be anywhere on the timeline. It could be after Rebels, it could be way before. Like, we have no clue where this is. And Rook is implied that he dies at the end of Rebels. I think he falls off like at that final battle, I think he falls off of the mountain or whatever. And they kind of leave it open-ended. Like, he's not like surely dead. So it could be afterwards. But I thought that was interesting that they had him do a little appearance to test Morgan Elsbeth. And it was cool to see her with her like Beskar spear.
Yeah, that spear was
sweet moves and stuff like that. I almost want to go back to that episode of The Mandalorian and watch that Ahsoka Elsbeth duel now that I have seen this. Because it was cool to see her on that world being the ruler, and cool reference to that episode of The Mandalorian. And that's what these episodes are great at, is like those little callbacks to all of the other media, Star Wars media out there, that they can just bring into these tiny short story episodes. That's what I love for Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire. It's perfect for the nerdy Star Wars fans like you and me.
But yeah, it's that perfect medium to fill in some of those stories, fill in some of those bits and pieces of the, the what it, like we said too, and I know we'll get into it more here, but like to finish the arc with Barriss Offee, that was a big question from Clone Wars. What ended up happening to her? Well, now we have our answer.
Right.
This is the perfect medium for that of, hey, we could answer some of these, it's a quick little arc. You don't need a ton of episode or time spent on it, but like you can still do it justice and give it enough time to still write it as a good arc and a good way to end, that person's story.
So let's just go ahead and pivot. So Barriss Offee, basically, if you guys haven't watched Clone Wars, she is a Padawan, is one of like Ahsoka's best Padawan buddies. And she ends up turning on the Jedi Order and Ahsoka. She frames Ahsoka basically for murder. She blows up a section of the Jedi Temple, which a few people die in, and frames Ahsoka for it. And she basically says at the end of her arc in Clone Wars, the Jedi Order has become the villains. She kind of becomes like an activist, extremist type of person, and gets locked up by the Empire to presumably never be seen again until now. So the Empire recruits her to be an Inquisitor, which I think is fantastic. I love that premise. And she initially is like, yeah, sure, why not?
Right.
I love how she just like goes along with everything. But the cool thing about that was we get to see how manipulative the Empire is. Like, we as viewers, we see the Empire and we're like, obviously the Empire is bad. It's this big bad thing. They're oppressing worlds and people everywhere, right? From her limited point of view, she's in this cell. She doesn't even know about the Order 66, right? Like, she knows nothing. She comes out and they offer her this chance to basically hunt down Jedi. And she's like, oh, okay, like maybe this sounds all right. She doesn't know the state of the world, but the Empire does not share that with her. They're just like, no, yeah, just go along with this. It'll be totally fine. And I think that's a really cool perspective at how the Empire and how world governments as well, not just the Empire, frame things to benefit themselves, and people just go along with it because that's what they see. So that's what Barriss did. She went along with it. And then we get, kind of this realization in episode 2 that, I guess the Empire's not all it's cracked up to be, as her mentor slaughters a whole city of people.
Seriously.
You think, like, you get a little bit of a clue that, like, maybe we're the bad guys here.
I'll be the baddies.
Are we the baddies? Yeah, right. It was so funny how she was so willing to go along with all this stuff. And then that happened and she like kind of just kept going along with it. The final straw was she was, and successfully too, which this is the wild part. So they find this Jedi that they're searching for in the mountains. She basically convinces the Jedi to come with them and like potentially become an Inquisitor, and they're going to surrender. And which is pretty incredible work in the 2 minutes that she's talking to the Jedi, right?
Right.
And then the other, what's her name? Lynn, I think her name is. Or is her like mentor or whatever?
The other sister.
Yeah, she just kills him and is like, oh, okay, that's like what I would expect her to do as like an inquisitor and evil villain type person.
Right.
And then that was obviously the final straw of like, oh, okay, well, these guys are definitely bad, so I'm not going to do that. Pushes Lynn off the edge, runs away.
Okay. Not just pushes Lynn off the edge.
Force.
She yeets her off the edge of that cliff.
It is a yeet.
That is a full push yeet. Force
can
push
be
yeet.
Qualified as a yeet. Yes, I would say so.
I saw that and I was like, oh, dang. Just sent her.
I think this episode was good. I think this is my problem with this series, actually. We get this 3-episode arc, but like she turns from fully going along with being an Inquisitor to fully being against the Empire in a span of 5 minutes, maybe. It happens so quick. And like, obviously, it's pretty obvious stuff that happens that, makes her realize this. But like, I feel like this arc would have worked better if you had more time to expand those stories. But I will say this was the better arc for me. I liked this arc way better than Elsbeth's. I still think if you're going to do this format, just make a show. I mean, this is a show, obviously, but like, expand it then. Make it a full 4-episode arc with 30 plus minutes of stuff. Give us a little bit more instead of like trying to squeeze an arc into these little 17-minute episodes and giving us 3. If you're going to do an arc, do a full arc. I think that episode was still probably my favorite episode out of the arc. And then the third one was pretty solid too. We find her, and this is another cool thing that both of these series do, is they kind of jump around the timeline a little bit. So this is down the road a bit. She looks old. So I don't know how old she is, but Lynn comes back, finds her, and basically she's been searching for her this whole time. So it's kind of cool that she's like, hid out. She's become this figure that like helps people. These people are going to her for help because they have a force sensitive child. And they're like, what the heck do we do with this thing? It's kind of the vibe I got. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll try to hide you from the Empire. But yeah, and then they come to this showdown and Barriss does some really cool stuff. She might not even have a lightsaber anymore. She didn't like show one.
Right. Well, I think part of it too, and that's kind of what we saw too from the Inquisitor stuff. Barriss was a very adept Force user. Like she didn't even need a lightsaber.
Exactly.
And plus too, like if you're in hiding, there's no quicker way to show, hey, you're a Jedi than having a lightsaber. So like,
exactly,
if you're trying to hide, I would make sense to not be using a lightsaber.
Yeah, and she already had obviously ditched the Jedi before that, so she doesn't. I'm sure she doesn't consider herself a Jedi.
Yeah,
we get this showdown between her and Lynn again, and she just like is dodging everything that Lynn's throwing at her. She whips out the Inquisitor like double-bladed spinning lightsaber, and she's still just like got her hands behind her back and just like dodging everything. I was like, that was cool. She saves the family that came to her for help in the process. Lynn ends up killing her. It's kind of a cool fitting end for a story like that. I don't know, like, what did you think of that ending? You kind of foresaw it because she obviously sent them off and was like, this is it for me, basically.
Right. Well, I thought it was interesting because, like, even just the fact of the like those caves they were in, like, it really reminded me of like those reflective caves from kind of like the sequel trilogy that we had in those movies.
Yeah.
How, like, Rey had that whole bit in, like, I get like that's the whole part of those reflection, and there's a lot of symbolism there. And like, I think that just ultimately kind of then showed how much Barriss had changed in that it was like she truly wanted to help, like she wanted that opportunity to show that like, no, like there's a better way. And I think that's kind of what you moved into after the fall of the Jedi and everything. You're moving into the newer stuff. Hey, there's a way beyond just Jedi and Sith. And it's just finding that.
I love that we're in this era of Star Wars. I think it's so cool.
It's very cool. And I think that's kind of what a big part of that was, showing that Barriss in a way found that there's more beyond just the Jedi. And that was kind of how that ending that I took it to show.
Right.
And like, I think then how that episode ended, like, I think it had that impact because she wasn't going to let her just die in that cave.
Right.
Like, she's like, no, we're getting you
Lynn
out.
takes her out. That was another thing that I was more time could have done this more justice, because she was a hardcore Inquisitor, even among the Inquisitors like that we've seen in video games and in Rebels and stuff like that. Like, she was pretty hardcore. She was like just slaughtered that whole village literally for lying to her, and that was it, right? Like, that's pretty intense. And the fact that she just decided on a whim that she like basically was gonna stop being an Inquisitor, like, and she didn't, granted, but the fact that you're saving Barriss kind of seems to me like you're giving up that life.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily go like on that far. I think it was more to show. I think we hit that earlier in an episode with Barriss, that there's a point where it finally clicks in your head that like there's more to this, because that's the whole point. The Empire is like the brainwash that the Inquisitor, like when you're become an Inquisitor and stuff, they don't want you to think about anything. Like, you just do as you're told. That's it. You just want to be blinded by that hate. And like, I think then you see that moment when fighting on that hilltop and she kills that Jedi. That's when it finally, that switch kind of flipped for Barriss, which is like, well, no, this is wrong. And I think, you can have those moments too of, living as an Inquisitor, doing all that stuff. Enough of those actions begin to take their toll. And like, even this whole time as she's looking for Barriss, like, in the back of her head, she's known, why did you do this? Why you wanted that confrontation? And then you have this moment, and then through those caves, that was kind of that moment too where it clicked. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to full blown like turn from Inquisitor, but like that, to me, that was that moment of like, I'm kind of wakening up from just what the Empire has put in my head.
Right.
Like, it's not necessarily a full blown like, oh, I'm a complete switch right now, switching my total philosophy on life.
Right. And they didn't obviously say anything, because the last scene we get is them like walking out of the cave. So we obviously don't know what happens after that. But I felt like it was a moment that, given more time, could have been earned better. It just was so, and the same thing with Barriss. Barriss's was more earned because we had that scene where, I keep saying Lynn, I hope that's her name, she like slaughters that whole village, right? Like, so that gets her thinking, obviously. And then in this one, there isn't like a precursor to her switching her mind about Barriss. Like, she's ready to kill Barriss when she goes in those caves. And then all of a sudden she's just like, boom, I'm just kidding, I don't want to kill Barriss. That didn't get earned to me. It was still a cool moment, but I don't think it had the impact that they wanted it to have.
Yes and no. Like, I think the linchpin of that whole thing is when it realizes Barriss was having that conversation. I'm trying to remember. It's probably going to come off as like a paraphrase or whatever, but like when she's talking to her in the cave, and then they have that realization where she's like, she makes the quote about fear, and she's just like, well, it doesn't sound like fear's your ally, fear's your master.
Oh yeah, there you go.
That's what it was. Mm-hmm. And I think that was that point, because like when she realized that she couldn't find her way out when she was trapped in those caves, and then she knew she was going to die, that was the whole point. Like, fear was no longer the ally, because fear was what they were striking into the villagers when she's killing that was fear.
Right.
But then her whole point was like, fear's never been your ally, it's your master.
Right.
And then in that moment, she was terrified of dying alone by herself in this cave.
Well, okay, there's another moment that I feel like wasn't earned, because she was running around in the caves for what, like 2 minutes? And then all of a sudden she's convinced she's going to die there. Like, well, I mean, more time could have done this episode a lot more justice.
Well, right, that's fair. But at the same time, when you're doing episodes like this, like, I don't need a full 10 minutes of someone running in a cave to get, and plus, like, it's part of that extrapolation on it. Like, you don't know, like, yeah, it's 2 minutes in the episode, but it could have been hours, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it could be strung out more, but it's for this.
Well, they didn't make it seem like hours, so if they had done that, maybe I would have liked it better.
That's fair. That's fair.
But either way, I still think it was a very solid finale episode for Barriss, and I thought it was cool how she basically was able to turn her in a way, not from necessarily being an Inquisitor, but at least from the hate and anger and fear and all that stuff in that moment. So still really, really cool. And I'd say, I mean, again, I love these little short stories that they're telling, and give me more. Like every May the 4th, that should become a tradition. Every May the 4th, they should give us another little mini series like this. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be a cool way of doing it too, because you can keep adding some of these more of these stories, and you never know.
Right.
Maybe that's a future story of Lynn or whatever her name is. Maybe we'll get more of her story.
Yeah,
or maybe she shows up somewhere else.
Maybe we'll get a story about Dexter Jettster's diner. Like maybe that's the one that needs to be told.
Right.
We'll find out. All right, Zane. Moment of truth. What was your rating of Tales of the Empire?
My rating for Tales of the Empire, I'm gonna give it like a 5. It's solid. Again, it's not like I'm gonna tell anyone like, oh, you got to go watch it. It's not must see TV. But for what it is and the story it's trying to tell, like I thought it was a decent job. I said, it added to the stories. Like I liked the arcs. It did enough for me. And then had the Clone Wars animation. Big fan. And so yeah, 5 of 5. I have no complaints with it.
Yeah. I also am giving it a 5. I feel like I sound like I've been harsh on it, but I give Tales of the Jedi a 6 out of 6. I absolutely love that series. So a 5 out of 6 is a solid score still. I thought it was still great. I love what they're doing with it. I want to see more. And Tales of the Empire, again, I said this earlier, but like there's so many Empire stories that need to be told. I'm fully on board for more Tales of the Empire specifically. I'm down for more Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Resistance, Tales of whatever the heck they want to tell. I'm going to watch it. But Tales of the Empire specifically, I feel like they have a lot of really cool stories to tell.
Yeah.
So I hope that they do come back to this specifically at some point. Hopefully they keep coming out with more miniseries like this.
Yeah, hopefully. That'd be really cool.
So there it is, officially 5 out of 6 from your Infinity Bros for the Tales of the Empire. All right, next up on the docket, Zane, is The Bad Batch. Great show that Zane and I, and actually Jarrett and Mark have been watching as well. I don't know if they're fully caught up on it, so they weren't on this episode, but it's definitely one that I feel like all hardcore Star Wars fans are going to love. So let's do some non-spoiler reviews quick, and then we'll get into the series here. What did you think of season 3?
I really like season 3. Like I thought there was the perfect way to end the whole story, like the way they brought everything around to end it. I thought season 3 was solid, and yeah, probably some of the best storytelling of all 3 of the seasons.
I definitely agree. I think storytelling wise, season 3 was the best out of the 3, and it was a perfect way to end this series. Man, this is the perfect series for hardcore Star Wars fans. Like, if you want to know more about the Star Wars universe, if you want to dive deep into some of the untouched stories of Star Wars, this series is for you. I loved every aspect of it. Overall, I don't think it was as good as a lot of these other things that we're getting in Star Wars. I'm not going to recommend this to the person who's only watched the original trilogy. Like this is just not for everybody. But as a Star Wars fan, I absolutely loved it. That's our non-spoiler reviews. Here is your official spoiler warning.
This is...
Prepare yourself.
An Infinity Bros.
Prepare yourself.
Spoiler. Warning.
All right, Zane. Season 3. Right off the bat, I want to say that I love The Bad Batch, and the creators of this show did a phenomenal job of differentiating it from the Clone Wars. Obviously, we find, this is a spin-off of the Clone Wars. We get the Bad Batch in the final season of Clone Wars, which is maybe one of the best seasons of animated television ever. Clone Wars season 7 is phenomenal. But this is a spin-off of that, and the first 2 seasons have been great. The difference between Bad Batch and Clone Wars is we have this very clear main storyline through all 3 seasons. Whereas in Clone Wars, you kind of get these like 4-episode arcs that you kind of ebb and flow with. The timeline jumps around. Like we're just telling stories basically of the Clone Wars in that series until you hit like, I think probably the 3rd or 4th season. Then you kind of get like a main storyline. that runs through it, and it just gets better and better as it goes. But the Bad Batch hits the ground running, has a great storyline throughout, and I think ends with a bang. And it's so cool that we get to explore this little corner of the Star Wars universe that in the big picture doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on the Star Wars universe. But the fact that we're getting these stories that are so good that could be told about anywhere in the Star Wars universe, I love it. I think it's so cool. Love exploring the Star Wars universe in this way. So, man, start off the season with Omega is on Tantus, the like secret Empire base that they're doing Project Necromancer on. Project Necromancer is kind of the main theme of this season 3. And I love, I don't remember exactly what episode it is. I think it's like 3 or 4, where we see the Emperor and he kind of lays down his expectations of this base, like what he needs from it in order for Project Necromancer to be a success. I love that they kind of keep it in the dark. That he doesn't really ever specifically say what his plans are for Project Necromancer. So throughout the whole season, we're still kind of like, what the heck is Project Necromancer? And obviously, like us as Star Wars fans, we like kind of know what that led to with Snoke and Palpatine clone in the sequel trilogy. But the fact that it keeps us in suspense through pretty much the final episode of this season just speaks to the great writing of this series. So what did you think of Project Necromancer? And do you think there was a collective cry from the sequel haters when that finally got revealed in episode 3, that they're like canonizing the sequel trilogy in other forms of Star Wars media?
People can have their own thoughts and everything on the sequel and 2, and like definitely I think looking back there many things could have been done different, but I think it's an interesting way because it ties into that, but it also adds more depth to it with how a fully like undoing it or fully like pigeonholing its way in, if you will.
Right.
Because it's just like it ties in and you can feel like the weight of it, and it still ties into your overall existing universe. But it's just like the story of how this is done is leagues better than anything you got in the movies, especially in those sequels. Like even though they use Project Necromancer more as just kind of like that boogeyman that you never really see, it's referenced and you kind of see part of what the end result of it is, but like this builds way more to the mystery of it, and like it does such a good job that, and it's just like, yeah, that's kind of that unspoken or unseen monster that you have kind of looming there. And the fact that this show adds to that canon, adds to that story, adds more depth to it without completely breaching it, like I thought that was very well done. Like that's writing.
What we need from these like spin-off stories, adding depth. And that's why it was so great that when we saw Emperor Palpatine in that episode, he didn't explain the whole thing like, oh, well, I need this to make a clone of myself and potentially, another clone of a different guy that's going to be one of my cronies. Like if we had him explain that, it would have like, well, first of all, it would have totally destroyed the mystery of the whole season. But at the same time, you would have had to either like completely confirm the canon of the sequel trilogy or the story of the sequel trilogy, but this way they added depth to it without actually really explaining what happened. So there's still kind of that mystery / there's still some details that can be explored and explained different ways if you need to further on down the road. So I think that was the perfect way to handle that, and that's what should happen in all spin-off TV shows, movies, any of that kind of stuff. Adding depth to the original project without screwing with the storyline, basically.
Right. Because I think that's something like it can get messy on that, is if you try to add more to that canon in more that establishment. I think that's probably a bad idea at this point to like to try to like force that into working. Like now it's just like you got the movies, just leave it there, add that mystery to it. But as you've seen with like Necromancer, and then what's the secret project of Gideon has in Mandalorian? What was his called?
Frick, I don't remember off the top of my head.
But either way, you see these projects that people have,
Yeah.
and then Stardust or whatever was the
Death Star.
Death Star.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's kind of the brilliant way of circumventing all this, because you have the Emperor, the whole necromancer thing, but you see all these other people that are like, no, I have my own idea of what I want to try to further.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a way that, hey, we still have everything set up from the movies. Here's Project Necromancer. Here's a project that failed. Because I mean, arguably, you could say the Death Star project. I mean, I guess it succeeded in blowing up Alderaan, but ultimately failed because it got blown up.
Right.
But like, to see that, that's kind of your workaround to say that, hey, we have a bunch of people with all these other plans and other stuff waiting in the wings that people wanted to try, people wanted to work. And it's just like, so now obviously, like, we're going to get that when we get the Mandalorian movie. We're going to see Thrawn with his plan now.
Yeah.
So like, it's not necessarily just one set thing. And I think that's kind of your workaround of that, and maybe that can be part of it too. You wrap that in the Emperor kind of just, and it makes sense too, as you're moving past this whole Jedi Sith. It's like the whole Emperor's Palpatine, his whole bit was on living forever, and so that was the whole point of the cloning, all that stuff. But as you're moving past the confines of what you have with Jedi Sith, well, now it's less of like, well, no one really cares about that anymore.
Right.
So that can be, I guess, to put it in like simple terms, like that's that old guy's plan of what he wants to do here. But now you can still expand the rest of the universe out around that, leave that as the dead end. All right, that can leave there. But because you already know that too. Yeah, he might have been the Emperor. But I mean, we even know that in Rebels that like Thrawn didn't agree with what the Emperor, like there was so many people that didn't agree, but obviously when you're in this big, scary, the Empire, like you can't necessarily express I don't agree with it. Like whoever's in charge, like that's what you're going with. But it's
not
clearly,
unless you want to get force choked to death,
right? So. Exactly. But like you see it like time and time again, and they've done a good job of introducing that you have all these people with their different ideas and the different plans and and it's like, so you can expand around this, and I think that's been a brilliant way that Filoni has kind of set this up. Because I think we all said that too after watching the sequel trilogy of like, well, how do you go from here? Like, what's your play? Okay, so Snoke was trying to, or you got Snoke, you got the Emperor trying to clone, and it was such a mess.
Right.
But like they did it, personally, it's a brilliant job. It was like setting up. Well, no, you have all these other plans that all these other people are doing, and you can have these shows. And now, like Bad Batch, like it showed part of this plan, and it showed how you can tell a story of these other plans. And show how it's like loosely connected, adds the depth, but you still have a very competent story in it of its own. And it's a Clone Wars spin-off. Like this isn't like a big budget. This isn't like your main draw. Like it was done as a spin-off.
I would even venture to say that it probably money-wise is not making Disney money, this show, because the only people watching this show are pretty hardcore Star Wars fans, right? Like, which there are a decent amount of, but like nobody is subscribing to Disney Plus to watch The Bad Batch. They should, because it's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
But it's not happening because the average person that is not a giant Star Wars fan is going to get lost in all of this like underworld and, all of the backstory of Star Wars, which is pretty much what this show is about. So and again, as Star Wars fans, it's fantastic, and the story itself is great, but it definitely is a look into the deeper universe of Star Wars. So, anyways, we kind of the main storyline, we get the kind of redemption of what's his name again? I keep wanting to say Deadshot.
Crosshair.
Not Deadshot, Crosshair. He's got the cross on his eye. But yeah, Crosshair, which I love that. It was kind of like a returning storyline from last season, where he basically goes with the Empire last season, and then at the end of the season realizes like, the Empire sucks, and he's in prison. So Omega and Crosshair finally escape Tantus, make it back with the squad. Tech dies. That was a thing that happened this season. That was crazy. You kind of always had the sense that one of them might die, but I did not think it was going to be Tech. I thought for sure it was going to be Echo, because like he's not that exciting or interesting, I guess.
I mean, true, but Echo's also that connection to with
right.
Rex, though.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And when you go through the season, you realize like obviously Echo is important to the storyline of the season, but like yeah, Tech dying, that was a pretty crazy. Like I think that was a good part of the story because it raised the stakes a little bit, and they
Yeah.
were all like, "Oh crap! Like we're not like just playing around and doing whatever we want anymore. Like this is life and death. Like this is big deal." And I kind of there's a buzz going around on the internet that everybody thought the Tech was going to show up. Like the Empire might have like recovered his body and like put him in one of those like crazy mercenary outfits that those guys had at that were fighting them at the end and stuff like that. But he never did. They stuck with their storyline, which I thought was pretty good of them.
And I'm glad they didn't do that. I think that
Yeah.
would have cheapened everything that the Bad Batch went through.
Agreed.
And the whole story to the end. Like I'm glad they left it how they did, because yeah, like you said, his death was so impactful.
Yeah.
And how that story at that moment shifted. Yeah, it's just like you got to leave it dead there. You bring that back, that just cheapens it too much.
Right. I agree. I don't think that would have been it would have been a crazy reveal, but yeah, I think that would have like cheapened his death, which they did make a big deal. And that was pretty early on in the season. That was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 episodes in. So like, yeah, it was that was pretty crazy. I think it was cool that they, killed off a main character that definitely had a significant impact on the rest of the season. And then, yeah, you get that Omega at the end of the season still keeps his glasses as like a, kind of remembrance of him. So kind of a cool little memento.
Right.
Later on in the season, we get guest appearances from Fennec Shand and Asajj Ventress. Ventress showing up was crazy and awesome. What did you think of that appearance?
Oh, that was sweet. Like it was one of those weird ones that you were like, I don't think it was necessary.
No.
But I love the fact that it was there, and I love the fact that there's potential that Ventress could show up, because Ventress was another one of those just fantastic characters from Clone Wars that, again, the story just kind of ended, but they didn't do anything with. But she has enough, like, star power, quote unquote, if you will,
right,
that you can do so much more with her character, just because she's kind of that. I mean, I always make I think Maul is more the comparison with Ahsoka, but at the same time, Ventress is kind of in that too.
Yeah, she's in that boat in the same thing where she realized like, hey, and was she even really fully Sith ever? Because I feel like she was one of the like her and Grievous were like basically almost mercenaries that Dooku like trained more so than like being full Sith.
Exactly, because it wasn't fully adhered to, I guess, the whole like it wasn't necessarily like Dooku's apprentice, quote unquote,
right?
But at the same time, yeah, it was definitely someone who was more than just a hired mercenary,
right?
But I thought then too, like it was a powerful moment then in the show of like when Bad Batch goes to fight her, because when they figure out who she is, and then when she uses her lightsaber and to find out it's no longer red.
Yeah,
it's yellow.
That was cool. I think I texted you that night too, and I was like, dude, did she okay, so that's a crazy Star Wars lore thing. Okay, so like if you guys don't know anything about lightsabers, basically the color comes from this crystal. It's Kyber crystal that each Jedi goes and like finds, and it changes. I mean, the lore has not always been the same, but like currently it kind of changes color based on the user's personality. And so when people turn to the dark side, they bleed their crystals is what they kind of call it. So they turn red because they're basically evil and corrupted crystals. So to get a lightsaber to go from red to any other color, you have to heal that kyber crystal, which apparently is a big deal. Like, we don't really know much about it. I'm sure there's probably some lore in it in like books and graphic novels and stuff like that, but like there's not a whole lot about it in like physical like TV movie media.
Right.
So the fact that she healed her kyber crystal, that was a really cool reveal, because that means that she's way more on the light path than I thought she was. Like, she definitely, even though she kind of like abandons her like Sith, you know, whatever she had of a Sith side and the Empire, and you know, before, she was abandoned by Dooku way before the Empire was even a thing.
Right.
Like, it was like before Order 66 happened, and I thought she still got way too much anger and like just she's out for blood for everybody, that she would still have a red lightsaber. But the fact that she is like healed somehow, that means that she's like healed kind of internally as a
Right.
person somehow too. That makes me way more interested in her now. So I can't wait to see if they have something for her in store down the road. That would be so cool.
Right. And I think, just to add on that too, because yeah, that just tells me like there's so much more story like that there, of seeing that process. Like, that could be a whole nother show.
That's a Tales of the, what do you even call
Right.
that? She's like not Jedi or Empire.
Right.
Like, what do you call that?
Right. Tales of Star Wars.
Tales of Star Wars. Yeah, that's a show that I want to see. I want to see
Tales of
her
the Tales.
story. Tales of the Tales. Yeah.
But right, like in that, or even just a full show, or like, how about we do this for a tie-in? How about her story? We have Asajj, and then part of her healing is she meets up with Marin from,
Ooh.
and that's how you tie in Cal Kestis.
That would be wild. That would be so cool.
Because I mean, that Marin tie, both Night Sisters,
and we kind of like, I think we did talk about it a little bit when Ahsoka was going on last year. I mean, Marin has that Night Sister tie with Morgan Elsbeth too, which obviously at the end of the season probably doesn't mean anything, because she's
right.
Even though she's dead, unquote unquote, she's also on a different planet in a different galaxy.
In a different galaxy, right.
It's probably not going to tie into anything in the future for Marin, but still, to see those characters come to the big screen would be phenomenal.
I think that's like legit, like my number one thing right now. Like, I know, like, I'll freak out like if I see Cal Kestis or Marin. Like, if you get them finally in the big screen, like tie that into Star, like that's my big moment. Like, that's what I need right now from Star Wars.
Right.
Bring that to the big screen, and like that would just be the epic culmination of like connecting all of this.
Yeah.
It's
I
hope Dave Filoni's listening to this.
Yeah, he always is. We know this. He definitely listens to our podcast. But yeah, that was a really cool part of this. I think you mentioned it. Was it necessary? No, but I loved it. And you're not watching this show out of necessity anyways. You're watching the show because you're a big Star Wars nerd. So what better to appease a big Star Wars nerd for than Asajj Ventress to show up for an episode? Like, it was perfect. Fennec Shand was cool too, but that one was like a little less exciting to me.
Right. Well, I mean, I feel like because we've just had more appearances of Fennec Shand,
right? And she appeared in the Bad Batch earlier, season 1 or 2, didn't she? I thought she was in
I mean, she's had appearances, but then I mean, like, we've had her in Boba Fett, we've had her in plenty of other like media too, right. And it's always kind of the same character. It was more of an impact because it's like we haven't seen Asajj since their last appearance in Clone Wars. So
yeah,
it's been years.
Like actual real life years.
Right,
because literally I'm trying to remember. I don't think she shows up in season 6. So she's in season 5. I think is her last appearance in the Clone Wars,
Yeah.
and that's, I mean, I would have to look it up, but it's early or late 2000s. I think it's like
Right.
it's a long time ago, like 10 years ago, maybe. So pretty wild that we finally get her back again.
It's been so long that she grew a full head of hair.
Yep, literally. So yeah, that was cool.
I also got to just add on that, like, I loved that they had that whole episode and the whole, like, the Jedi training, quote unquote. And I'm so glad that we had a thing where they didn't shoehorn that Omega had Force powers.
Yeah.
Like, I love that they were just like, nah, nope, she doesn't have it. Because I feel like that's such a tie-in, and I know that was a big complaint from Ahsoka that, oh my goodness, Sabine, and like I get it, but there was something about it finally seeing of just like, no, some people don't have it, and that's okay.
Yeah,
that wasn't why Omega was wanted. Omega was wanted because of her M count,
right?
But that was because she was a clone.
Isn't it
not because
so
she
funny
was
too, though, that they literally are so embarrassed that the midichlorians were even a thing that they're just referring to it as an M count.
The M count, yeah.
It's so funny. I absolutely love that they did that. They're just like, nah, it's not midichlorians anymore.
It's M count, right?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. But I mean, and so we're like at the age where Phantom Menace was like when we were little kids. Like when I watched Phantom Menace, I fully accepted that midichlorians were a thing, and like I didn't even care. It was fine. I wasn't like an old cynic when Phantom Menace came out. So the midichlorian thing does not bother me like it bothers a lot of Star Wars fans, but I just think that's hilarious that they're basically trolling the Star Wars universe by bringing them back and making them a big part of the story moving forward. Just so funny. But yeah, I do agree though. I think it was cool that they kept her just like a normal non-force sensitive person. Right. Which goes to show too that their research may not mean anything if a high M count person still isn't really attuned to the force or whatever. Maybe that's an anomaly, maybe not. Who knows?
Well, maybe it's not entirely fair to say that she's non-force sensitive. Like, I think she's force sensitive. She just, like I said, she just didn't have the capacity for it.
Right.
Like,
the capacity or the desire. Like,
right. Also true, which probably also ties into that.
She's already got everything she needs. So why would she need to?
Right. And like I said too, like I think that's the whole point of her character was she was cloned to have the high M count, because obviously that's what they needed, because that was the whole point to tie in, because Palpatine needed that for his clones, because normally clones, like, that was my take on it. Like, she was purposely created, so she was basically the test tube that had the part of the research to have the high M count. But like, she's not the end result. You got to take her blood with another and combine that to get. So basically, she was the carrier of the M count.
To get a force,
you got to get the clone right. So you got to put it into the rest. Well, the clones aren't the force sensitive ones. It's just so then she's basically carrying the technology for it. That when Palpatine has his clone, he just takes her blood because she's already has the whole M count for it.
That makes sense.
Because then so it was more that was what her value was. It wasn't that she's magically going to become a super powerful force user. Right. Yeah. It was just that she was genetically created to have a high M count because her body was basically to be, genetically harvested for the M count. It wasn't that she was supposed to be force sensitive. Mm-hmm. It was just that she's the test tube of M count.
Right. I think that makes sense with the vibe of the show as well.
Right.
Too. So, and you know what? Like, I mean, we saw it too with Andor as well, but like a show without force sensitive people. I mean, obviously we get Asajj Ventress that we've been talking about, but like the fact that we get a show that's all about people that are not force sensitive, like it still can be a really good show. Like Andor was fantastic. Bad Batch has been phenomenal. Like it can happen. That means there's so many more corners of the Star Wars universe that we can explore and people are hopefully still going to be interested in. So, but yeah, and then we get last thing that we get is a scene of adult Omega, basically starting to sneak off to fly, be a pilot in the Resistance, which I thought was a pretty cool like nod to, you know, just like general Star Wars lore. She has a conversation with Hunter, and Hunter's like, it's so funny that Hunter, this manly macho like clone that like tracks things and has this big knife, is this like overprotective father figure. Like it's just so great. So he basically is like, as she's an adult, still trying to convince her like, you don't need to do this, like you're fine living here with no adventures and no nothing. You can stay here. But yeah, that conversation between Omega and old Hunter was
Hunter.
it was cherry on top of a great show.
Well, I think that's the beauty of it too, to then wrap that up, like the end of that. Like it really just goes more to show that like Hunter basically became like that father figure to her.
Mm-hmm.
And even just that, and I mean, you even saw that then through the course of the show when she's a kid, but then to have that end like that of the adult of her going off, that, you know, off into the world to, you know, join the Resistance, like it still very much still showed that kind of wrapped up that story that just like, you know, like it very much is that father-daughter like relationship. And like that was such a cool, you know, thing to see, because it really was like, it legit has like, they were like a family. Like that's what the Bad Batch is, you know.
That's awesome. I know. And then like, I was not expecting to cry at all, but this finale got me, dude. Tears weren't flowing, but they were definitely welling up.
Yep,
got a little misty. It was a great finale, and it wasn't one of those like, I think we talked about this with another show that we recently reviewed, but it wasn't one. Oh, it's Shogun last time that we talked. It wasn't one of those like big bang finales, like boom, everything's happening and everything is crashing down. And you know, it wasn't like one of the. I mean, it was still pretty action packed and still pretty great, but it was one of those just kind of chill, like satisfying endings. Like this was a perfect ending to this show. And man, I just appreciate everything that season 3 brought for us. I thought it was a perfect season to cap off this run, and very appreciative of this show.
Absolutely. And I think just to add to that too, I saw someone else was saying this online, and I was like, oh yeah, that's the perfect way of wording it. It's just like, not too often in Star Wars, in a lot of these stories, does the story end as a happy ending.
True.
And that's kind of what makes this such a good, satisfying ending, is because it truly it's a happy ending for Bad Batch.
Yeah.
They got Omega. They were literally able to stop fighting and literally just live and basically retire and just have peace. And it's just like, that never happens for anyone in Star Wars. It feels like,
yeah, for
and
real.
so like, just the fact that wrapped up, and you see that end, that like they actually got a happy ending, and especially knowing just the fact that there were clones, and seeing how clones were treated in the rest of the Empire, and then not only the fact that they're clones, but the fact that when you look at it then from the scope of from the Clone Wars, like the Bad Batch was like the lowest of the clones. Like they were specifically made, they were the Bad Batch. Like they were literally set aside because they weren't the perfect clones. They were literally, you know, set apart. Like, hey, you're just going to run these suicide missions because you're different. And so the fact that they get a happy ending is a super, like, so you can't help but just kind of smile at that. You're like, if there's anyone that was super deserving of having a happy ending, it's those guys, and they got it. And it's such a satisfying thing to see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a good point, though. Not too many happy endings in Star Wars, so that's really cool that this one did end on a happy note. All right, Zane, what was your rating of season 3 of The Bad Batch?
Season 3, I gotta give season 3 a 6 out of 6. Like I said, it's the best storytelling of all 3 seasons. The how it ends, like it when they finally just ended Harkin at the end, like you just wanted to stand up and clap.
Yeah,
You're just
I
like,
did. Oh,
and
it's
like
so great.
the weight of that final episode, because like there was a legit that point. You're like, are they gonna pull this off?
Right.
Like you were legit just like I was prepared of like they're gonna lose more than just Tech here.
Yeah.
Like how is
same.
this gonna end? But then the fact
Mhm.
they pulled through, and then that was the ending. Like it was so well done. So
Yeah.
season 3 for me, 6 out of 6.
I'm exactly on the same page as you, Zane. I think this season specifically is a 6 out of 6. I don't even know if I would call the whole show a 6 out of 6, but this
Yeah.
season was definitely the best of the 3. It was the perfect way to end this show, and like you said, happy ending. You can't really be mad about that. So great season of the Bad Batch, 6 out of 6. That's an Infinity Snap on the Infinity Bros podcast
Yeah.
for season 3 of the Bad Batch. So there you go. Let us know what you guys thought of season 3 of the Bad Batch. You can hit us up at theinfinitybros.com, anywhere on social media. You can email us at infinitybrospodcast infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com. We got one last thing, Zane. We're gonna probably zoom through this one because we're already at
I was gonna
hour
say
and a half.
we're already up there.
Top 6 Star Wars things.
We're going in 3, 2, 1. You're entering the top 5 on the Infinity Bros podcast. Starting now.
Okay, so we're just like thinking we haven't done a top 6 for a while. We already did top 6 Disney Plus Star Wars shows, and we're kind of thinking like, do we throw in animation? No, let's just do a total top 6 of everything, every type of media, movies, TV shows, video games, anything. Throw it all in there. See what we get. Let's mix it up. The big melting pot of Star Wars. So let's just, since we're kind of zooming through it, Zane, let's just go through our whole list. Why don't you go ahead and go first? What is your top 6 Star Wars things?
All right, top 6, and like this was a tough one because like I even told you, like I got to like I started throwing everything down, then I got it down to like a top 15. I was like, okay, well no, like I legit was at 15, and then I got it down to a 10, and I was like, I don't like how do I keep going down to 10? It. Mm-hmm. So again, like this is one of the toughest like for a top 6 because like in like there's so much stuff on here that it could easily be like switched out. Because even still, like if we did honorable mentions, we'd be significantly longer. Because there's like
we'd be listing so many projects if we did honorable mentions.
All right, so for me, just run through this quick. At number 6, I have Return of the Jedi.
Ooh,
just it's the classic ending of what we grew up with, the ultimate battle, and also I freaking just love the Endor fight and the Ewoks.
It's so good, dude.
It's so good.
I love it.
Number 5 for me is actually Jedi Survivor.
Oh,
I love nice. Jedi Survivor, and like
so good.
And like I've said this before, I'll say it again. Like that's the closest. Like, and I've played plenty of Star Wars games. That's the closest feeling of playing as being a Jedi as you're gonna get. Like I always make the comparison of like playing the new Spider-Man games make you feel like Spider-Man. Playing Jedi Survivor makes you feel like you're a Jedi, and I love that. Now, the story of Fallen Order I think is better, but the gameplay and it feels and how it all comes together in Jedi Survivor, it's top notch. So that's 5 for me. Let's see. Number 4 is the Bad Batch.
Wow,
like
Bad Batch made your list, huh?
I really love the Bad Batch. Like this is something I will regularly rewatch. I very much enjoyed it.
Nice.
And then let's see. We got
number 3.
Number 3, we have Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
Just because again, not a huge fan of the animation. But story-wise,
so good, dude.
It's some of the best storytelling in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like it's top notch.
Yeah.
Number 2 is The Mandalorian. Like he's just got Din Djarin walking around, just being a dude.
Yeah.
It's so much fun, and just even the resurgence it had of when that came out, that it just kind of got everyone back on the Star Wars shows,
Yeah.
and like it's so satisfying. And number one for me is the Clone Wars.
Wow.
The,
Dang.
the Clone Wars is a show like I watch
Mhm.
every year. I watch through the Clone Wars every year.
That's wild,
and
dude.
and it also has a bigger impact for me because like I always liked Star Wars, growing up, like watching the old movies, kind of in the early 2000s when the prequels were coming out. But like for me, like it didn't really start that fire for me until I watched the Clone Wars, and just it really opened, because like before, yeah, you liked it was cool, the movies, but like Clone Wars is when it really opened up to me that there's so much more depth here and there's so much more storytelling. So like Clone Wars, watching that is what really lit more of the Star Wars love for me. It's kind of started that fire. So like it's number one for me. So yeah, like I
Dang.
said, I watch it every year. So
That's crazy, dude.
it's
Clone Wars at number one.
It's my number one.
All right. Clone Wars is actually the thing that I had to bump off my list, and I was really sad
Ooh.
about it because
It's tough.
It's so good. Like that again, I mentioned it earlier this podcast. That season 7 of Clone Wars is probably the best season of animated television ever. It's so stinking good. The Maul and Ahsoka showdown
Oof.
in the, I think it's
In the sewer?
second to last episode or the last
Yeah.
episode, one of those two. Holy moly, it's so good. But anyways, yeah, that is a phenomenal show, but unfortunately not on my list. My number 6 is Knights of the Old Republic 2. I feel like my list is very nostalgic because Knights of the
That's
Old
fair.
Republic 2 critically did not do that well because people didn't really like the storyline. And I was a child when I played this, and I did not care about what critics thought, and I loved it. And it's probably the Star Wars game that I've replayed the most.
Right.
And to be completely honest, I never even finished Knights of the Old Republic, the first one. But I replayed 2 many, many times because it was a really fun game for me. So
And that's what's funny about you saying that, because like Knights of the Old Republic 2, that was the last one I bumped off my list.
really,
So it's just like
we're
we're
flipping,
so
yeah.
close, right? That's what I mean.
Mhm.
Like there's so much stuff, and it's so any of it could be anywhere.
Like we could make probably a top 20 list, honestly.
Oh,
Like,
easily.
There's so much good Star Wars content out there. My number 5 is Rebels because, again,
Ooh.
like you mentioned, that's probably one of the best. That's the best storyline of any TV show. The knock is the animation. I like Clone Wars animation so much more than the Rebels animation, but storyline wise, it's a 6 out of 6. It's amazing. So I had to have that on my list. Number 4 is actually Andor. I loved Andor so much, and that was another one of those shows that just showed like there's so many cool things that we can explore in Star Wars that don't need to be Jedi Sith related, and like barely like it just dove into so many new avenues of Star Wars that just hadn't been told before. So I loved that about it, and the fact that we got and not even what's his name, Cassian Andor, Diego Luna, like he was great, but my favorite part of that show is when we get Kino Loy, I think is his name, Andy Serkis's character. Man,
That monologue is
there's
so
that
good.
one episode that we get his monologue and then Stellan Skarsgård's monologue like 5 minutes later, and it's the best episode of Star Wars television ever. It's so stinking good. I'm like, I watch that episode and I'm ready to like punch a wall and like
literally
go run a marathon.
Oh yeah.
It's so good. So yeah, that's my number 4, and my number 3 and 2 and 1 are probably boring, but I just can't. I can't do it any differently. My number 3 is A New Hope. It's basic Star Wars, man, but it's the beginning. It's the beginning. So I always come back to these old movies, and I probably rewatch them at least every year or every other year. And I'm like, man, it's just so classic, and it's so like, it's just what started it all. So they're special to me, even though me and you grew up in the era of the prequels. Like those are our jams. Like we love those movies, but they're just not that great movies when you
Right.
take a step back and look at it.
Right.
But they're awesome to us. But A New Hope, love it. It's the beginning. the whiny Luke is the only thing that really gets me about that movie. Can't take whiny Luke that much. 2 is Return of the Jedi. Wow, that one gets smoke on socials for some reason, but I don't know why. It's so fun. It's the most fun one for sure. I love, like you said, the Ewok Endor battle. Oh, it's so great. I absolutely love it. And then number 1 is Empire Strikes Back because it is just the most iconic sci-fi film that you can think of. I mean, everybody, whether you've seen a Star Wars movie or not, knows that Darth Vader is Luke's father, because everybody has heard that line, Luke, I am your father. Everybody has heard that. And the fact that it became so iconic in this culture is just, it's so cool that this is something that I can, hold on to and love and pass on to my kids and still enjoy it, for what it is. And I think there is something to be said that, those movies are dated a little bit, but they're so classic and still fun to watch. And I can't put anything else above those on my list. So there it is. That's my list. What's your list? We want to know. Let us know on social media or on Discord, or you can hit up theinfinitybros.com to check out our list. So thanks, Zane, for joining me on this very Star Wars centric episode.
Absolutely. It's always a good time. I mean, Zane and Isaac mess arounds are always good, but then when we're talking Star Wars, it's even better.
Dude, like I even said before this episode on our Patreon exclusive, which you can go to our Infinity Bros Patreon in the show notes to get exclusive access for unedited episodes. Said beforehand, I was like, we got to skip the Patreon because, well, number 1, I was feeling crappy. And number 2, we could literally talk about the Star Wars stuff for hours.
Oh, easily.
So if we add more to our Patreon, we're going to be talking for like 3+ hours. So yeah, we need to skip all that and just go straight to the Star Wars stuff. So Zane and I love talking about Star Wars, and going to be a lot more Star Wars content coming out this year. We got The Acolyte coming in June.
Yeah.
And then Skeleton Crew is actually coming in December, I think. 2 live action Star Wars shows coming later this year. So
and Outlaw comes out in August.
Oh yeah, the video game. That looks so good too. Oh, I'm excited for that.
It's going to be a good year for Star Wars.
I feel like I say this a lot, but I'm not a person that really buys like pre-orders games or buys them on release even, but that's one that I probably will buy on release. So there you go. Thanks, Zane, for joining me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a good time.
And thank you, Infinity Bros Universe, wherever you're listening, however you're listening. Thank you so much for making us a part of your podcast experience. We love you 3000.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Infinity Bros podcast. You can find the Infinity Bros on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube at The Infinity Bros. You can also check out our website at theinfinitybros.com for links, reviews, and sweet merch. Feel free to send us listener feedback via social media or email at infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com.